The evening air was cool as Lisa Morgan walked into the small bar on the edge of town. She wore a black leather jacket over a dark shirt and her long brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. The bar was called Murphy's and it was the kind of place where people came to forget about their day and relax with a cold drink. Lisa liked it because nobody bothered her here, and the bartender knew to leave her alone unless she asked for something. She took her usual seat at the corner of the bar and ordered whiskey. The bartender was an older man named Pete, who had owned this place for 20 years. He poured her drink and set it down without saying much because he knew Lisa preferred it that way. She wrapped her fingers around the glass and took a slow sip, while looking at nothing in particular. Her arms were covered in tattoos that went all the way up to her shoulders and even onto her neck. Most of them were hidden under her jacket, but a few were visible on her hands and wrists. To anyone watching, she looked like just another person trying to unwind after a long week. The bar was quiet tonight with only a few regulars scattered around at different tables. An old jukebox in the corner played country music at a low volume, and the lights were dim enough to make everything feel comfortable and private. Lisa had been coming here every Friday for almost 2 years now, and she had never caused any problems. She paid her tab, minded her business, and left when she was ready. That was how she liked things. Simple and quiet. But tonight was going to be different whether she wanted it or not. The door to the bar swung open and a group of men walked in making enough noise to turn every head in the place. There were 6 of them, and they all wore leather vests with patches that showed they belonged to a motorcycle gang called the Iron Wolves. The leader was a big man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos that looked like they were done in someone's garage. His name was Danny Kruger, and he was known around town as someone who caused trouble wherever he went. His gang followed him like loyal dogs, and they seemed to think that being loud and aggressive made them tough. Danny scanned the bar with a smirk on his face, looking for someone to mess with. His eyes landed on Lisa sitting alone at the corner and he grinned. He liked picking on people who looked like easy targets, and a woman sitting by herself seemed perfect. He nudged one of his friends and pointed at her, then started walking in her direction. His boots were heavy on the wooden floor and everyone in the bar could hear him coming. Pete the bartender noticed what was happening and his face tightened with worry. He knew Danny and his crew were bad news, but he also knew that trying to stop them usually made things worse. Lisa noticed Danny approaching, but she did not turn around or acknowledge him. She kept her eyes on her drink and took another sip as if he did not exist. This made Danny angry because he was used to people reacting when he walked up to them. He stopped right behind her and leaned in close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath. He put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed it. That was his first mistake. Lisa's hand shot up faster than anyone expected, and she grabbed Danny's wrist with a grip that made him wince. She twisted his arm away from her body and turned to face him. Her blue eyes were cold and hard like ice, and her expression showed no fear at all. She spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried across the entire bar. She told him not to touch her. Danny tried to pull his hand away, but her grip was too strong. His face turned red with embarrassment as his friends started laughing at him. He had just been handled by a woman half his size, and everyone saw it happen. His pride was hurt, and that made him even angrier than before. He yanked his hand free and took a step back while his crew kept laughing and making jokes. Danny's face twisted with rage, and he reached out to grab Lisa's arm, intending to drag her outside, where he could teach her a lesson without witnesses. Pete shouted at him to stop and warned him that he would call the police, but Danny was beyond caring about consequences. He grabbed Lisa's jacket with both hands and tried to pull her off her seat. That was his second mistake, and it was going to cost him more than just his pride. Lisa moved so fast that most people in the bar missed it. 1 second Danny had his hands on her, and the next second he was face down on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that looked painful. Lisa had swept his legs out from under him and pinned him down using techniques that were clearly professional. Her knee pressed into his spine and her grip on his arm was unbreakable. The entire bar went silent. Danny's friends stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Something about the way Lisa moved told them this was not a normal bar fight. This woman knew exactly what she was doing, and she could probably handle all of them if they tried anything stupid. Lisa's voice was calm as she told Danny that he was going to apologize to Pete for disturbing his bar, and then he and his friends were going to leave. She asked if he understood, and increased the pressure on his arm just enough to make her point clear. Danny shouted that he understood and begged her to let him go. Lisa released him and stood up smoothly, taking a step back to give him space. Danny scrambled to his feet, rubbing his shoulder and breathing hard. His face was red and sweaty, and he looked like he wanted to run out of the bar. But then his eyes fell on Lisa's arms, and what he saw there made him freeze completely. During the struggle, Lisa's jacket had shifted, and now more of her tattoos were visible. Danny stood there staring at her right forearm, where he could see a detailed emblem of an eagle perched on an anchor with the words, United States Marine Corps, curved around it. Below that were numbers and letters that looked like coordinates and unit designations, but it was the tattoo on her left forearm that made his blood run cold. It showed dog tags hanging from a rifle that was stuck upright in the ground, with a helmet resting on top. Surrounding the image were names, dozens of them, each one carefully written in small, neat letters. At the bottom of the tattoo were words that Danny recognized even though he had never served in the military. Operation Red Dawn, Kandahar Province, 2019, we remember. Danny's mouth went dry and he felt his hands start to shake. He knew about Operation Red Dawn because it had been all over the news years ago. A small group of Marines had been sent to evacuate civilians from a village in Afghanistan when they got ambushed by enemy forces. The Marines had been outnumbered 10-1, but they held their position for 3 days while waiting for backup and air support. Most of them died, but they completed their mission and saved over 200 civilian lives. The unit had been led by a female captain who became a legend in military circles. She had called in airstrikes so close to her own position that her uniform caught fire. She had carried wounded soldiers across open ground while bullets kicked up dirt all around her. She had been awarded the Navy Cross for her actions, but most people thought she had died in that battle. Except she had not died. She was standing right here in this bar. Danny whispered that Lisa had been there, and his voice barely worked. Lisa did not answer, but she slowly rolled up her sleeves to show more tattoos. Each one told a story of battles fought and friends lost. There were unit patches and battle coordinates and more names than anyone could count in a single glance. On her shoulder, partially visible under her shirt, was another tattoo that made Danny's knees weak. It was the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration that America gives for valor in combat. One of Danny's crew members, a younger guy named Kyle, stepped forward and his face had gone pale. Kyle had tried to join the military once but washed out during basic training. He had spent enough time around real soldiers to recognize what he was seeing. He told Danny in a shaking voice that this was Captain Morgan, the one from Kandahar. He said he had seen her picture in military magazines and documentaries. The rest of Danny's crew shifted nervously and started backing toward the door. They had come into this bar looking for fun, and now they realized they had just attacked a decorated war hero. Danny felt like he was going to be sick. His whole life he had used his size and his gang to bully people and make himself feel important. He had never done anything meaningful or brave, and now he had just assaulted someone who had literally saved hundreds of lives and watched most of her unit die doing it. He tried to apologize, but the words came out wrong and stupid. Lisa cut him off and told him that it did not matter who she was. She said he should not treat anyone the way he treated her tonight, whether they were a veteran or not. She asked if he understood, and her voice had an edge of command that made everyone in the bar stand up straighter. Without thinking about it, Danny nodded but could not speak. Pete, the bartender, had been watching everything with wide eyes. He had known Lisa was a veteran, but he never knew the details of her service. He felt guilty for not standing up to Danny more strongly, and he told Lisa that her drinks were on the house from now on. Lisa shook her head and said that was not necessary because she paid her own way. Pete insisted that it was necessary to him, and his voice was firm. The other people in the bar had moved closer to see what was happening. Many of them were veterans themselves or had family members who served. They looked at Lisa with new respect and understanding. Her quiet nature suddenly made perfect sense. She was not antisocial or unfriendly. She was just someone who had seen too much death and violence to care about small talk and trivial things. An older man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap stepped forward with tears in his eyes. His name was Frank, and he walked with a limp from an old injury. He told Lisa that his grandson had been in Afghanistan during the same time period and had written letters home about what her unit did. He said his grandson came home alive because she and her Marines bought enough time for the evacuation to succeed. Lisa's jaw tightened and she looked away. She said they were just doing their job and nothing more. Frank insisted that it was more than that. He said she had saved his grandson's life and the lives of hundreds of others. He called her a hero. Lisa turned back to face him and her voice was quiet but firm. She said the real heroes were the ones who did not come home. She said their names were on her arm because they deserved to be remembered. She said she was just the one who survived and that was all. The bar was completely silent now. Even the jukebox seemed quieter than before. Everyone was looking at Lisa with expressions of respect and awe. Danny's crew had already started moving toward the exit, but Danny himself could not move. His feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. Kyle, the young man who had recognized Lisa, stepped forward and stood at attention the way soldiers do. He apologized to Lisa on behalf of everyone there, and said there was no excuse for what happened. His voice was formal and respectful. Lisa nodded once to acknowledge his words, then turned back to the bar and picked up her whiskey glass. Pete had already refilled it without being asked. Danny stood there feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. His entire identity was built on being tough and making people afraid of him. But standing in front of this quiet woman, he realized he had never known what real toughness was. Real strength was not about muscles or fighting or intimidating people. It was about doing the impossible when everything was falling apart. It was about protecting others even when it meant sacrificing yourself. He wanted to say something meaningful, but his mind was blank. Frank sat down on the stool next to Lisa and asked if he could join her. Lisa nodded and Frank settled himself carefully. He said he knew she probably did not want to talk about it, but he asked if she would tell him about the names on her arm. Lisa was quiet for a long time. Then slowly she traced her finger over one of the names and said it belonged to Corporal Jake Henderson, who was 22 years old. She said he made her laugh even when everything was terrible, and that he died protecting a civilian family from shrapnel. Frank nodded with understanding and said he had friends like that in Vietnam who did not make it home. Other people in the bar started approaching Lisa one by one. They did not ask invasive questions or demand stories. They simply thanked her for her service or shared their own connections to the military. Some offered to buy her drinks. Some just shook her hand. The whole atmosphere of Murphy's bar had changed from a rowdy Friday night into something more serious and meaningful. Pete told everyone about how Lisa had been coming to his bar for 2 years and never caused any trouble. He said she never talked about her service or asked for special treatment. She just wanted to be left alone. Frank said that was how real veterans were. He said the ones who talked the loudest usually did the least. The ones who actually saw combat did not brag about it. Danny listened to all of this from his spot near the door. His crew had left already, too embarrassed to stay, but he could not bring himself to leave. Something about this moment felt important, like it was a turning point in his life. Finally, he walked slowly back toward the bar, keeping his hands where everyone could see them. He asked Lisa if he could speak to her. Lisa turned and looked at him with a neutral expression and asked what he wanted. Danny said he needed to apologize for real, not just because he got caught or because he found out who she was. He said what he did was wrong, and the way he had been living his whole life was wrong. Lisa studied him for a moment, then told him his apology was noted. She told him to leave. Danny felt desperate and asked her to please let him say something. He said he had spent his whole life pretending to be tough and building a reputation. But standing here looking at what she had been through and what she had done, he realized he was nothing. He said he was a coward who picked on weaker people to feel strong. Lisa took a sip of her whiskey and said that recognizing the problem was the first step. She said what mattered now was what he did next. Danny swallowed hard and said he wanted to change and be better, but he did not know how. Lisa considered this for a moment, then told him to start by treating people with respect. She said he should stop using fear and intimidation. If he wanted to feel strong, he should do something that actually required real strength. She said he should help people instead of hurting them. Danny blurted out that he wanted to serve like she did. He said maybe if he joined the military, he could make up for being a bad person. Lisa interrupted him with a firm no. She said he should not join the military to find himself or make up for past mistakes. She said he should only join if he was truly ready to put others before himself and follow orders even when he disagreed with them. She said he had to be ready to give his life for people he had never met. She said the military was not a program to fix broken people. Danny felt his face get hot with embarrassment, but he did not look away from Lisa. He asked what he should do then. Lisa set down her glass and turned to face him completely. She said real strength was not about muscles or fighting skills. Real strength was a single mother working 2 jobs to feed her kids. It was a teacher spending their own money on school supplies. It was anyone who kept going when life got hard, and who helped others even when they were struggling themselves. She pointed to the names tattooed on her arm and said these Marines were strong because they stood their ground when running would have been easier. They protected civilians who could not protect themselves. They followed orders that might get them killed because it was the right thing to do. Lisa continued and said every one of those Marines had a choice. They could have hidden or run away and nobody would have blamed them. The situation was impossible and the odds were against them, but they stayed and fought and most of them died doing it. The bar was so quiet that people could hear the ice melting in their drinks. Everyone was listening to every word Lisa said. She told Danny that if he really wanted to change, he should start by finding ways to serve his community. She said he could volunteer at the hospital where veterans were treated. He could help elderly people with their yard work. He could mentor young people who were going down the wrong path. She said he should be useful instead of threatening. Danny nodded slowly and asked what he should do about his crew, the Iron Wolves. Lisa asked what about them. Danny said they followed him and if he changed, they might come with him or they might turn on him. Lisa said then he would find out who his real friends were. She said the people who stuck with him when he was trying to be better were worth keeping. The ones who only liked him when he was causing trouble were never really his friends to begin with. Kyle spoke up from near the door and said he would stick with Danny. He said what they had been doing was not right and he knew it was not right. He said he went along with it because he did not have the courage to speak up, but he wanted to change too. Danny looked at Kyle with surprise and asked if he was serious. Kyle said yes and explained that his father was a veteran who would be ashamed of what he had become. He said maybe they could both do better. Frank cleared his throat and said he ran a program at the Veterans Hall where they did community service projects every month. He said they were building a wheelchair ramp for a disabled veteran next Saturday, and if the boys wanted to make a real difference, they could start there. Danny looked at Frank, then at Kyle, then back at Lisa. For the first time in many years, he felt something other than anger or fake pride. He felt hope. He told Frank they would be there on Saturday. Lisa nodded once as a gesture of acknowledgement. She told them that was good and then said they should get out because Pete's customers had enough excitement for one night. Danny turned to leave but stopped at the door. He said Captain Morgan and thank you. He thanked her for not breaking his arm when she had the chance and for the advice. Lisa told him not to thank her yet. She said he should thank her by actually changing his life. She said words were easy but actions were what counted. After Danny and Kyle left, the bar slowly went back to its normal atmosphere. People returned to their drinks and conversations, but there was a new feeling in the air, a sense that something important had just happened. Pete refilled Lisa's glass without asking and said that was really something. He said she might have changed that man's life tonight. Lisa shrugged and said maybe, or maybe Danny would go back to his old ways as soon as the shame wore off. She said people usually did not change. Frank said some people do change, though. He said he had seen it happen before. Sometimes all it took was the right push at the right moment. As the evening went on, more people came up to Lisa to thank her or share their own military stories. She accepted their words quietly and never tried to be the center of attention, but she did not refuse their genuine appreciation either. A woman named Betty, who had been sitting in the corner, finally got up the courage to approach. She was in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. She said Captain Morgan softly and told Lisa she did not mean to intrude but wanted to thank her personally. Lisa looked at her with curiosity and asked what for. Betty's voice shook with emotion as she said her son was one of the civilians evacuated from Kandahar. She said he worked as a translator for the military, and when the attack started, Lisa and her Marines protected the evacuation site. She said her son wrote letters about Lisa and how she stayed calm under fire and made sure every civilian got out safely before thinking about herself. Lisa asked what her son's name was, and Betty said it was David Wright. Lisa's eyes widened slightly with recognition, and she said she remembered David. She said he was brave and helped them communicate with the local families. She asked how he was doing now. Betty started crying as she said he was good and back home working as a teacher. She said he named his daughter Lisa after the captain. She said because of what Lisa did, her son got to come home and have a family. She said she got to keep her son. For the first time that evening, Lisa's calm face showed emotion. Her eyes became wet with tears and she had to look away for a moment to get control of herself. When she looked back, she said quietly that she was glad David made it home. She said he deserved to have a life. Betty's voice was firm as she said Lisa deserved to have a life too. She said her son told her that Lisa carried guilt for the ones who did not make it home. She said the people who survived and their families were grateful every single day for what Lisa did. Lisa did not say anything, but she reached out and squeezed Betty's hand briefly. It was a silent way of acknowledging what Betty had said. Pete watched this happen and felt even more respect for Lisa than before. Here was a woman who had been through terrible things and saved many lives, but she still carried the weight of the people she could not save. She did not want glory or recognition. She just wanted to live quietly and remember her fallen friends. Pete said gently that he had been thinking about doing something at the bar to honor Lisa's unit. Maybe a memorial or a plaque on the wall. Lisa immediately shook her head and said no. She said her Marines would not have wanted that. They would want to be remembered by their families and the people who knew them, not turned into a public display. Pete said people should know what they did because it mattered. Lisa gestured to Betty and said the people who needed to be saved already know. She said that was enough. Frank nodded in agreement and said Lisa was right. The mission was to protect those civilians, and they did it. Their gratitude was the real memorial. The conversation slowly moved to other topics, but the feeling of respect stayed in the air. Lisa had accidentally become the focus of attention in Murphy's bar, which was something she clearly had not wanted. But she handled it with the same quiet dignity she showed in everything else. Over the next few weeks, things in the town started to change in small but meaningful ways. Danny and Kyle showed up at the Veterans Hall that Saturday just like they promised. They worked alongside other volunteers to build the wheelchair ramp, and everyone was surprised to see them there. Danny's change was not instant or perfect. He still had a temper, and sometimes his old ways of thinking came back. But he kept showing up and kept trying. The Iron Wolves as a gang basically fell apart. Most of the members left when there was no more excitement or fear to feed on. But Kyle stayed loyal, and together he and Danny started putting their energy toward helping the community instead of terrorizing it. Lisa kept coming to Murphy's bar on Friday evenings, but now her quiet time alone was gently interrupted by friendly conversations. Frank became a regular companion, and they would sit together. Two veterans from different wars sharing an understanding that did not need words. Betty came in often too and brought pictures of her grandchildren and updates about her son David. Lisa never said much, but she always listened, and Betty could see that these stories brought her some peace. About a month after the incident, Danny came into the bar one evening. He looked different, cleaner somehow, even though he still wore his motorcycle gear. He walked up to Lisa carefully as if he thought she might send him away. He said Captain Morgan and told her he wanted to thank her again and show her something. He rolled up his sleeve to show a new tattoo on his forearm. It was simple but meaningful. It said Service Before Self, and was surrounded by small symbols representing the different community organizations he had been volunteering with. He said he knew it was nothing compared to what Lisa had earned, but it was his reminder. Every time he felt tempted to fall back into old habits, he looked at the tattoo and remembered what real strength looked like. Lisa looked at the tattoo and nodded with approval. She told him good and reminded him that the ink did not matter. What mattered was living up to what it represented. Danny said he was trying. He said he and Kyle had been working with young people who were at risk of joining gangs. He said they used their own bad experiences to steer kids away from that life. He said if they could not be good examples before, at least they could be warnings now. Lisa said that was good work and told him to keep at it. Danny hesitated and then asked Lisa how she dealt with everything. He asked how she handled the memories and the guilt. Lisa was quiet for a moment before answering. She said honestly, some days were harder than others. She said she tried to focus on the people who made it home and the lives that were saved. She said she volunteered at the hospital where veterans were treated and helped other veterans adjust to civilian life. She said keeping busy helped, and helping others reminded her why the sacrifice mattered. Danny asked if she ever regretted it, joining the military and serving and putting herself through all those terrible things. Lisa answered without any hesitation and said never. She said she regretted losing good people, and she regretted that war existed at all. But she did not regret serving and did not regret the choices she made. She said they did what needed to be done. 6 months passed since that Friday night when everything changed. Murphy's bar had become a meeting place for veterans and people who volunteered in the community. Pete had been inspired by everything he witnessed and started hosting a weekly gathering for veterans. It was a safe space where they could talk or just be around others who understood what they had been through. Lisa was still a quiet presence, but she had started opening up more. She began speaking at local schools about military service. She did not glorify war or make it sound exciting. Instead, she helped young people understand the importance of duty and sacrifice and service to others. Her message was simple. Real strength came from helping others, not from dominating them or making them afraid. Danny had completely changed his life. He enrolled in community college to study social work because he wanted to officially counsel young people who were at risk. The Iron Wolves were now called the Iron Volunteers, and they were a group of former troublemakers who dedicated themselves to helping the community. They organized food drives and cleaned up neighborhoods and served as mentors to kids who needed guidance. Kyle had reconnected with his father and was seriously thinking about joining the military for real. But this time it was for the right reasons. He wanted to serve and be part of something bigger than himself. Lisa had written him a letter of recommendation. In the letter, she noted his growth and his genuine desire to change and make a difference. One evening, Betty came into the bar with her son David. He was a tall man in his 30s with kind eyes and an easy smile. When he saw Lisa sitting at the bar, he walked straight to her. He said, "Captain Morgan," and there was so much emotion in those two words. Lisa stood up and held out her hand to shake, but David pulled her into a hug instead. He said simply that she saved his life. Lisa replied that he helped them save everyone else. She said his work as a translator was crucial to the mission. David stepped back and pulled out his phone to show Lisa a picture. It was a little girl about 5 years old with bright eyes and a big smile. He said, "This is Lisa, my daughter." He said she was named after the bravest person he ever met. Lisa looked at the photo, and for the first time since the incident at the bar, she smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached her eyes and changed her whole face. She said the little girl was beautiful. David agreed and said she was beautiful, and she was here because of what Lisa did. He said when his daughter was old enough to understand, he would tell her about the woman she was named after. He would tell her about real heroism and sacrifice and what it meant to put others first. That evening, Murphy's bar was full of life and laughter. Veterans told stories and families expressed their gratitude. A community that had been touched by violence and redemption was celebrating the quiet strength of one woman who had simply tried to have a peaceful drink. Frank stood up and raised his glass to make a toast. He said to Captain Lisa Morgan and to all those who serve with honor. He said, "May we never forget their sacrifice, and may we always try to be worthy of it." Everyone in the bar raised their glasses, and Lisa, who was uncomfortable with the attention but deeply moved by it, nodded her thanks. Pete leaned over the bar and said quietly to Lisa that when she first started coming here, he just thought she was a quiet woman who liked whiskey. He said he never imagined she would end up changing so many lives. Lisa said she did not do anything special. She said she just stood her ground. Pete said that was exactly what she did. By standing her ground, she showed everyone what real strength looked like. She gave Danny a second chance to be a better person. She reminded everyone what service and sacrifice really meant. He said that was not nothing. That was everything. As the evening continued, Lisa looked around the bar at all the faces of people whose lives had been touched by that one confrontation. She saw Danny, who was now focused on helping others and had found real purpose in his life. She saw Kyle, who had reconnected with his family and was considering a life of genuine service to his country. She saw Betty and David, a family that was whole because of choices made in a war zone thousands of miles away and years ago. She saw Frank and the other veterans, men and women who carried their own scars and pain but found strength in being together and supporting each other. Her tattoos, those permanent reminders of loss and sacrifice, felt a little less heavy that night. The names inked into her skin would always be there and would always hurt when she looked at them, but now they were surrounded by new memories and new hope and new purpose. She thought about her fallen friends, the Marines whose names covered her arms. She tried to imagine what they would think of this moment, and how their sacrifice had created ripples that touched lives in ways they could never have known or expected. She thought they would be proud, not of her specifically, but of what their service had meant and how it had inspired others to be better people. Lisa raised her glass one more time in a private toast to the friends who did not come home. She whispered so quietly that only she could hear. She said, "We remember and we carry on." In this small bar in this small town, a decorated war hero sat among friends and neighbors. Her tattoos were no longer just markers of loss, but had become symbols of strength that endured, and the power people had to change and be redeemed. She had walked into Murphy's bar looking for solitude and quiet. She had accidentally reminded an entire community what it meant to serve and sacrifice and stand firm when things got hard. Even though she would never ask for recognition or praise, Lisa Morgan had become exactly what her fallen friends would have wanted her to be. She was a living reminder of the values they had all fought for. She was proof that even in the darkest moments, honor and courage could show the way forward. The weeks turned into months, and the changes in the community became more permanent. The Iron Volunteers grew from just Danny and Kyle into a real organization with 20 members. They partnered with local schools and the police department to create programs that kept young people out of gangs. Danny finished his first semester of college with good grades and discovered he had a talent for connecting with troubled kids. They listened to him because he had been where they were, and he understood their anger and frustration. But unlike his past self, he now showed them a better path. Kyle eventually enlisted in the Marine Corps and sent Lisa a letter from boot camp. He said training was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he was not going to quit. He said every time he wanted to give up, he thought about her and the Marines from Operation Red Dawn. He said if they could hold their ground for 3 days against impossible odds, then he could finish boot camp. Lisa kept that letter in her jacket pocket. Murphy's Bar continued to be a gathering place, but it had evolved into something more meaningful. Pete started a fundraiser to help veterans who were struggling with medical bills or housing. The community responded with surprising generosity, and they raised enough money to help 15 veteran families in the first year. Frank's weekly veteran meetings grew larger and became an important support system for people who had served. They did not just talk about their problems. They also organized activities like hiking trips and fishing days and volunteer projects. The focus was on moving forward while honoring the past. Lisa became more involved than she ever intended to be. She started leading a support group for female veterans who often felt isolated and misunderstood. She was not a trained therapist, but she did not need to be. The women who came to her group just needed someone who understood what they had been through. Lisa provided that understanding without judgment. She also began working with the local high school to teach a class on leadership and ethics. The principal had approached her after hearing about what happened at Murphy's Bar. At first, Lisa refused because she did not think she was qualified to teach. But the principal insisted that her real-world experience was more valuable than any textbook. The students in her class were initially intimidated by her. She was quiet and serious and did not try to be their friend. But as the semester went on, they came to respect her deeply. She taught them that leadership was not about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It was about making hard decisions and taking responsibility for the people under your command. She taught them that real courage was doing the right thing even when it was difficult or unpopular. One of her students was a girl named Sophie who was being bullied at school. Sophie was small and shy, and the bullies targeted her because she was an easy victim. After several weeks in Lisa's class, Sophie approached her after school one day. She asked how to deal with people who were bigger and stronger and mean. Lisa looked at Sophie for a long moment before answering. She said strength was not about size or physical power. She said the bullies targeted Sophie because they were actually weak inside, and hurting someone smaller made them feel strong. She told Sophie that real strength was continuing to be kind and decent, even when others were cruel. She said standing up for yourself did not always mean fighting back physically. Sometimes it meant refusing to be intimidated and getting help from people who could protect you. Sophie started crying and said she felt weak and scared all the time. Lisa told her that feeling scared did not make her weak. She said even the bravest people felt fear. The difference was that they did not let fear control their choices. She told Sophie about the Marines from Operation Red Dawn and how they were all terrified during that 3-day battle. But they stayed at their posts and did their jobs anyway because people were counting on them. Sophie asked if Lisa was scared during the battle. Lisa answered honestly and said she was terrified every single moment. She said she thought she was going to die and that all her Marines were going to die, but she could not show her fear, because her Marines needed her to be strong and calm. She said leadership sometimes meant pretending to be brave even when you were falling apart inside. That conversation with Sophie reminded Lisa why her survival mattered. She had thought for years that she should have died with her unit in Kandahar. She struggled with guilt over being alive when so many good people were dead. But talking to Sophie and helping Danny change and supporting other veterans made her realize that surviving gave her a chance to make a difference. Her fallen friends would not want her to waste her life drowning in guilt. They would want her to honor their memory by helping others. On the 5th anniversary of Operation Red Dawn, Lisa did something she had never done before. She organized a small memorial service at the local park. She invited the families of the Marines who died, other veterans and members of the community who wanted to pay their respects. Betty and David came. Frank was there with many other veterans. Danny and the Iron Volunteers helped set up chairs and a small stage. Kyle came home on leave from the Marine Corps specifically to attend. Lisa stood in front of the crowd and spoke about each Marine who died. She told stories that made people laugh and cry. She talked about their courage and their humor and their dedication. She read the names slowly and clearly so everyone could hear. After each name she paused and the crowd said together, "We remember." When she finished reading the names, Lisa talked about what those Marines had accomplished. She said they saved over 200 civilian lives during those 3 days. She said some of those civilians were children who were now growing up safe because of what her unit did. She said that was the real meaning of their sacrifice. It was not about glory or medals. It was about protecting people who could not protect themselves. She said every person in the crowd had the power to honor those Marines by living with the same values they died defending. She said they could serve their communities and protect the vulnerable, and stand up for what was right even when it was hard. At the end of the ceremony, people came forward to place flowers at the memorial display Lisa had created. It showed photos of each fallen Marine along with their names and ranks. Betty placed a flower and told Lisa that her son David was there in spirit. He could not attend because he was teaching, but he sent his love and gratitude. Danny placed a flower and stood silently for a moment with his head bowed. When he walked away, his eyes were red, but his face showed determination. The ceremony ended, but people stayed to talk and share food and support each other. It was not a sad event, even though it was about loss. It was about community and remembrance and the bonds that connected all of them. As the sun began to set, Lisa stood alone looking at the memorial display. Frank walked up beside her and put his hand on her shoulder. He said it was a beautiful ceremony and her Marines would be proud. Lisa nodded but did not trust herself to speak. Frank said he knew it was hard for her to be the center of attention like this, but it was important. He said the community needed to understand what sacrifice looked like, and the families of the fallen needed to see that their loved ones were not forgotten. Lisa finally spoke and said she hoped she did right by them. Frank squeezed her shoulder and said she did more than right. She gave those fallen Marines a voice and made sure their story would continue. That night, Lisa returned to Murphy's bar one last time that week. It was late and the place was mostly empty. Pete was cleaning glasses behind the bar and looked up when she walked in. He poured her usual whiskey without asking and set it down in front of her. She sat in her usual spot at the corner of the bar and wrapped her hands around the glass. Pete asked how she was holding up after the ceremony. Lisa said she was tired but okay. She said it felt good to honor her Marines properly and to see how many people cared. Pete said the whole town had been talking about the ceremony and about her. He said people finally understood what she had been through and why she was the way she was. Lisa smiled slightly and said she was still the same person she always was. Pete disagreed and said she was not the same. He said when she first started coming to his bar, she was closed off and distant. Now she was part of the community and people looked up to her. She had let people in even though it was hard. Lisa thought about that and realized Pete was right. She had spent years trying to be invisible and alone because she thought that was what she deserved. But the incident with Danny had forced her into the open, and what she found there was not judgment or pity. She found respect and community and purpose. She found a way to honor her fallen friends by helping others. Her tattoos would always remind her of what she lost, but now they also reminded her of why she survived and what she needed to do with the life she still had. She was not just a survivor carrying guilt. She was a leader and a teacher, and an example of what true strength looked like. In this small town, in this quiet bar, Lisa Morgan had found a new mission. It was not as dramatic as combat or as urgent as protecting civilians under fire, but it was just as important. She was showing people every day that heroes were not perfect, and that strength came in many forms. She was proving that even the most broken among us could heal and help others heal, and she was making sure that the sacrifice of her Marines meant something beyond medals and ceremonies. Their memory lived on in every life she touched and every person she inspired to be better.